the government is planning to come out with a regulation that is all set to impact the chartered accountants, the cost accountants, and the company secretaries. What is set to happen is that the government is taking the reins, the disciplinary, in its own hands. So what does this mean for the chartered accountants, cost accountants, or company secretaries who are based in India? I'm Sachin Dave, Senior Editor with the Economic Times, and we'll go through the whole controversy and what this means if you are one of these professionals. Before we go into the controversy, let us first start with the basics. So what is happening is that the government is introducing a bill. The Chartered Accountants, the Cost and Work Accountants, and Company Secretaries Bill. Basically what the government is saying is that if you are any of these three professionals, then we, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, will monitor and make sure that the regulations are followed.
Many members have made my explaining a bit lesser because they recognize that since after Satyam scandal, subsequently till 2013 when the ILFS scandal happened, we have repeatedly been questioned about the number of failing chartered accountants or chartered accountants who did not deliver as was the expectation through the letter and spirit of the Act needed to be acted upon. And in that, you find that over and over again, questions are being asked as to why wouldn't it be a more transparent process. With these concerns, a lot of consultations have been held, stakeholders have been repeatedly met, and also even a standing committee once earlier, sir, had gone through these issues, and at that time, it was felt, and it was in fact recommended by the standing committee then, that we need to have a greater transparency in the mechanism, and that is where from that standing committee, we've had this voice for greater transparency to be brought in.
This is straightforward a conflict with the Institute of Chartered Accountant, which is the body, the CA body. In the past too, the government has tried to regulate the chartered accountants by introducing NAFRA, or National Financial Reporting Authority. However, what has happened since then is that the government seemed to be disillusioned, or at least the government has moved past NAFRA, and now the government is saying is that we will take the reins in our hands. The Ministry of Corporate Affairs will make sure that the chartered accountants follow the regulations, and if they don't, we are the ones who will go ahead and take punitive actions, if any. The way the government has come up with this regulation is that many chartered accountants, or at least the body, feels that this is encroaching into its own authority. After introduction of NAFRA, the ICAI has already said that it is the only function that ICAI was left with was to make sure that it conducts exams. Now with this particular bill, even that seems to be under threat.
But this one act, which is now going to have an impact on each of the three acts, is only to the limited extent of bringing in greater transparency in the disciplinary processes with which these institutions function. And therefore, the three institutes, governed by their respective acts, will continue to have the responsibility for the functions which have been with them always, whether it is for qualifying people, licensing people, regulation of their conduct. All this will continue to be with them. And even as regards students, the institutes had earlier also full powers, and that shall not be interfered with. That will continue to be with them.
So what is it that the bill says? Now there's a couple of things that the government has said under the bill. The first is the government wants to establish something like on the lines of IITs and the IIMs. The government is saying that we'll come up with these institutes where you can train chartered accountants or cost accountants or company secretaries. Now this essentially means that ICAI, whose main role was to organize exam, ICAI's power would be reduced substantially if this regulation is being implemented the way it is worded. The second thing that the government is saying is that there will be quarterly meetings. Not just that, the government will set up a committee that will meet every quarter and make sure that the functioning of CA and CS or the functioning of the professions is done as per the regulation. The government or this committee can even take punitive action. Not just that, the government has set a time frame for going ahead with punitive actions. What this really means is that some of the complaints that were pushed under the carpet by the ICAI, or at least that were the allegations, the ICAI will not be able to do so. The ICAI in the meantime has raised objections to these sort of these suggestions by the government. The ICAI feels that the government is getting into a territory which it should not. Not just that, the government wants a non-chartered accountant to head these committees. The ICAI president and some of the senior ICAI officials have raised strong concerns on these, saying that how will a non-chartered accountant be able to understand the ongoings? The government on its end feels that this is as per the global practices, as per how the best institutes globally function.
Globally, the conduct of chartered accountants who are auditors in public interest entities are regulated by independent authorities. That is what is happening with NAFRA also. The PCAOB of USA, the FRC in UK, the ASCI in Australia, the IRBA in South Africa, the CPAB in Canada are all headed by people who are not professional chartered accountants. So the National Financial Reporting Authority, the NAFRA, sir, which actually looks at public interest enterprises, many members did speak about it, are also dealing with these matters with non-members, with lay members. So their independence from the profession has not in any way undermined the decision making that they have been all the while engaging in.
In the past, there were allegations against the ICAI, or at least that was what the government felt when I interacted with some of the government officials, is that there seems to be a coterie inside ICAI, and the ICAI members do not take action against certain firms, especially some Indian firms, because the way ICAI function is that you need some votes to get elected. And obviously the allegations were a conflict of interest, that you cannot go against your own voter base, something that ironically happens in any democracy, including in this government. So what is set to happen? Now, if we conclude, if we have to say it in one sentence, what is set to happen is this: the government will have its own way. The government will set up institutes. The government will make sure that punitive actions are taken against chartered accountants and CA firms. The government will make sure that not just the large firms such as the Big Four, that is Deloitte, PwC, EY and KPMG, are being punished, which the government has punished them in the past, but even Indian firms and Indian chartered accountants will come under intense scrutiny. Whether or not this benefits the profession, or whether or not this benefits the corporate governance as far as corporate India is concerned, only time will tell.
Above all, I think this would also facilitate India to be able to support institutions and firms which can be encouraged by the Council to create something similar to the Big Four, which we periodically talk about, but completely of Indian origin.